The engine is called the F-1. 5 of them sat under the Saturn V. Together they made 7.5 million pounds of push. That is about 30 jumbo jets, all at full throttle, all at once. No single rocket chamber has ever burned harder than one of those 5. And for 4 years, they could not stop them tearing themselves apart. Not wearing out. Not overheating. Tearing themselves apart in less time than it takes you to blink. There is no film of it happening. It was over before any camera on the site could catch it. All the engineers ever got was the wreckage and a line on a chart that shot off the top of the page. So they did the last thing you would expect. They went back to the stand and they brought the bomb. This is how they built it. And this is what nearly stopped them. You know how this ends. 13 flights, and not one of them killed the people on board. What you probably do not know is how close it came, and that the closest call happened on the last flight before anyone climbed in. So let us start with the machine. 363 feet, nose to tail. Lay it on its side, and it is a football field, goal line to goal line, both end zones. It is 33 feet through the middle. Stand a man at the bottom of it, and he does not reach your knee on the drawing. Fully loaded, it weighs 6.2 million pounds. That is about 1,700 family cars. And here's the part that matters. Almost none of that is the spaceship. The whole Apollo craft, the bit that carried 3 men to the moon, is the small pointed piece at the top. Between the two sits a second stage with 5 smaller engines of its own, and a third stage above that with 1. Hold on to that. You will need it later. Everything else below is fuel and the machinery to burn it. The first stage alone is 138 feet of it. Loaded, that stage weighs just under 4.9 million pounds. Empty, it weighs 300,000. 94% of the biggest machine ever flown was the stuff it was about to set on fire. It is not really a rocket. It is a fuel tank with an engine bolted underneath and a very small room on top for the people. There was a rule for testing rockets, and everyone followed it. You fly the first stage on its own. When that works, you add the second stage and fly again. Then the third. One new piece at a time, so when something breaks you know which piece broke. It is slow. It is expensive. And it is obviously correct. Then a man named George Mueller threw it out. His plan was to stack every stage, live, on the very first flight. They would fly with full tanks. They would put the real spacecraft on top. They would test everything, all at once, on the very first try. Wernher von Braun's team fought him hard. These were the people who had built rockets for 20 years, and they thought it was reckless. Mueller's answer was arithmetic. Test it their way and nobody lands on the moon before 1970. Mueller won the argument. And that decision is the reason everything you are about to see had to work on the first try. In 5 years' time, it comes due. Cut the first stage open, and there is almost nothing inside it. 2 tanks. That is the stage. The bottom tank holds kerosene. 203,000 gallons of it, refined jet fuel, near enough. The top tank holds liquid oxygen, chilled until it pours like water. 331,000 gallons. Put them together, and it is over 500,000 gallons, most of an Olympic swimming pool. Kerosene will not burn without oxygen, and there is no air where this thing is going, so it carries its own. Now look at the problem that creates. The oxygen is on top. The engines are at the bottom. The kerosene is in between. So the oxygen has to get from the top tank, past the kerosene, down to the engines. They did not route it around the outside. They ran it straight through. 5 pipes, 17 inches across, dropped down through the middle of the fuel tank inside sealed tunnels. Around each pipe, there is a gap of plain air. That thin sleeve is the only thing keeping the two apart. Liquid oxygen sits at nearly 300 degrees below zero. Touch the kerosene with it, and the fuel freezes solid. Remember those 5 pipes? They are half of what almost destroys this rocket. Here is the wall of that tank. Not a picture of it, the real thickness. Just under 2/10 of an inch. Roughly 3 coins stacked. That is the outside wall of a machine holding 500,000 gallons of liquid. And 7.5 million pounds of thrust is shoving up from underneath it. They did not get there by rolling thin sheet. They started with thick aluminum plate and cut most of it away, leaving raised ribs running the length of the panel. Stiff where a rib runs. Almost nothing in between. And the thickness is not even the same all the way up. It steps down 4 times from bottom to top, because the load at the bottom is carrying everything above it, and the load at the top is carrying almost nothing. Every ounce they milled off is an ounce that does not have to be lifted to the moon. Thin is how it gets there. Thin is also why, 6 years later, this wall is the thing that shakes. Then you have to join it all up. About 6 miles of weld in one stage, every inch of it x-rayed. Not sampled. All of it. Notice what they would not do here. They would not assume. Hold on to that habit. It is what saves the engine later. Underneath the tanks is the hardest piece of structure on the vehicle. 5 engines push on it. Each one shoves with 1.5 million pounds. But they do not push evenly. And they do not push on the tank. They push on 5 small patches of metal. The job of the thrust structure is to take 5 furious point loads and spread them into one even squeeze around the bottom of the fuel tank. It stands about 20 feet tall and weighs 24 tons. Nearly all of that is beams doing that one job. Look at how the engines sit. 4 around the outside, 1 in the middle. The middle one is bolted solid. It only pushes. The outer 4 are hung so they can swivel a few degrees each way. Engineers call that joint a gimbal. That is the whole steering system. There is no rudder. And fins do nothing where it is going. To turn the largest rocket ever flown, you tilt 4 engines slightly, and the rest of it follows. And remember this floor. 24 tons of beam, and it still is not truly stiff. Nothing this big ever is. It is the other half of what almost destroys this rocket. Take one of them off and stand it on the floor. 18.5 feet tall. 12 feet across at the mouth, wide enough to park a car inside it. 9 tons of metal, and it is mostly hollow. Follow the path the fire takes. At the top is a flat plate. Engineers call it the injector. Kerosene and oxygen arrive at that plate as liquid and leave it as spray. Below it is the chamber where they burn. The chamber squeezes down to a narrow waist. Engineers call it the throat, and it is about 1 yard across. Everything that burns has to get out through that one hole. That squeeze is what turns hot gas into speed. Past the throat, the walls flare open into the bell. And the bell is not a solid wall. It is made of 178 metal tubes, laid side by side and brazed together, with cold kerosene racing through every one of them on its way to the fire. The fuel cools the wall on the way in. Without that, the wall would be gone in seconds. And a little of that kerosene never goes into the fire at all. It seeps out around the edge of the injector and washes down the inside of the chamber, a thin, cool film between the metal and the flame. The wall never touches the fire directly. Everything that follows depends on that staying true. Inside the chamber, the pressure is about 1,000 pounds on every square inch. That is 30 times what is in your car tires. And the flame is close to 3,000 degrees Celsius, hot enough to vaporize steel in seconds. Something has to push all that liquid into the chamber against 1,000 pounds of pressure, fast. Fast enough that one engine swallows nearly 3 tons of kerosene and oxygen every second. So bolted to the side of each F-1 there is a second engine whose only job is to feed the first one. It is a pump. It spins 5,500 times a minute. That is 90 turns every second. And it takes 55,000 horsepower to keep it spinning, roughly 500 family cars of that era, on one shaft to serve one engine. And you cannot plug it into anything, so it burns its own fuel. About 3% of everything the engine is drinking gets siphoned off and burned in a small chamber just to spin that pump. Then here's the trick. The exhaust from the pump is not thrown away. It is piped down and let out around the bottom of the bell, where it lays a cool blanket of gas along the inside of the metal. The pump's waste is the only thing protecting the last few feet of nozzle from the fire going past it. Now put all 5 together. 14 tons of kerosene and oxygen every second. Back to that flat plate at the top of the chamber. It is nearly 4 feet across, and it is drilled with thousands of small holes. Kerosene comes through some. Oxygen comes through the others. Each hole is aimed so its stream hits a neighboring stream in midair, a fraction of an inch below the plate. Where 2 streams collide, they shatter into a fine mist, and mist is what burns. Solid liquid does not. That is the entire job of the injector. Turn 2 liquids into one cloud. Evenly. Everywhere. At once. And that word, evenly, is where the trouble lives. This is not a fuel pipe. It is a machine for making a flame with a particular shape. Get the pattern right, and you have the most powerful engine ever built. Get it slightly wrong, and the flame finds a rhythm. And that is the reason somebody, one day, decided the only safe engine was one you could throw a bomb at. Everything in that chamber is burning. Burning gas is loud, and loud means pressure waves, bouncing around inside a metal drum a yard wide. Normally that noise is just noise. It goes nowhere. But sometimes a wave arrives back at the flame at exactly the moment the flame is strongest. The wave makes the burning harder. The harder burning makes the wave bigger. The bigger wave comes back sooner. It is the same thing that happens when a microphone gets too close to a speaker, except the microphone is a wall of fire and the speaker is 4,000 pounds of kerosene a second, and it is that pump putting it there. The waves in an F-1 did not run up and down the chamber. They ran around it, in circles, chasing the wall. And a pressure wave scraping around the inside of that chamber wipes off that thin, cool film of fuel you just watched me draw. Once that is gone, the wall is holding the flame directly. The chamber does not crack. It opens. They first saw a hint of this in 1959. On the 28th of June, 1962, it stopped being a hint. An engine on the stand went unstable, tore its own fuel lines apart, and destroyed itself. And nobody could say why that one, and not the one standing beside it. Here is what they were up against. The failure took a few thousandths of a second. No shutdown switch on Earth is fast enough to catch that. You cannot watch it. You cannot slow it down. And you cannot even make it happen on purpose. Some engines ran perfectly for 100 tests, and then let go on the 101st. You cannot fix what you cannot reproduce. So they changed the question. Instead of asking how do we stop this, they asked, can we make an engine that survives it? They ran over 2,000 full engine tests. They tried more than 100 different injector plates. They moved the holes. They changed which way they pointed. They changed how far apart they sat. And they put walls on the plate. Copper walls, 3 inches tall, standing up into the flame. 2 rings and 12 spokes, cutting the face into 13 separate compartments. A wave that tries to run around the chamber now runs into a wall. Then came the honest part. A design that had not gone unstable, yet was not proof of anything. So they screwed a small bomb onto the injector face, ran the engine to full power, and set it off. That is what the charge in the first shot was for. The rule was simple. Kick the engine as hard as you like. It has to settle down again within 0.4 of a second on its own. The final design did it in about 1/10. In September 1966, NASA cleared the F-1 to carry people. Now Mueller's gamble comes due. April 4, 1968. The second flight of a Saturn V. Nobody on board, and everything on the line. On Mueller's plan, there is no gentle build-up left to fall back on. The next one after this carries men. It lifts off cleanly. Then, 1 minute and 50 seconds in, the whole vehicle starts to shake. Not a rattle. A hard, rhythmic pounding up and down the length of it, for almost a minute. The rest of the way to the end of that stage's burn. Instruments tore loose. Panels tore off the cover wrapped around the moon lander. And it was not finished. On the second stage, the one with 5 smaller engines, 2 of them quit. One of them died. A second later, another shut down too. And that one was working perfectly. The wiring had been crossed, so the shutdown signal for the broken engine went to the good one too. Then the third stage refused to relight in orbit. On the last test flight before people got on board, the biggest rocket ever built shook itself half to pieces and lost 3 engines. It still reached orbit. Barely. So what was the shaking? Go back to the 2 things I asked you to remember. A rocket is not rigid. It is long and thin. Anything long and thin can bounce along its own length. This one stretched and squashed a few times a second. That is the thrust structure and the tank walls flexing. The floor I told you is not truly stiff. And running down the inside of it are those 5 oxygen pipes, full of heavy liquid. Now watch the loop close. The engines push a little harder for an instant. The whole vehicle squashes. Squashing shoves the liquid in the pipes forward, which feeds the engines a little more, so they push harder still. That pushes harder on a structure that is already springing back. If the timing of the bounce happens to match the timing of the pipes, the 2 feed each other and grow. Engineers call it pogo, and they named it after the stick because that is exactly what it looks like from the outside. The fix is almost silly. They took the valve at the bottom of each oxygen pipe and let a pocket of helium gas sit in a cavity beside it. Gas squashes. Liquid does not. That little bubble of gas is a shock absorber on a fuel line, and it broke the loop. For months later, they proved it on the ground. Apollo 8 flew in December with men aboard and did not shake at all. Take the whole thing apart, and it hangs on a small number of decisions. Change one, and the story ends differently. Say the baffles never work. The engine is never trusted with people, and the moon waits for a different engine in a different decade. Say Mueller loses the argument. Every stage gets its own flight, the schedule stretches, and the landing lands somewhere in the 1970s, after the money and the political will have gone. Or take the smallest one. Say nobody puts helium in that valve. Apollo 8 flies in December 1968 with 3 men on board and pogo still in it. The 3 most important pieces of this machine are not the ones that look impressive. One is a copper wall 3 inches tall. Another is a bubble of gas in a valve. The last is a decision to stop being careful. 13 Saturn versus flu. Not one of them failed to deliver its crew. That record cost $25.8 billion at the time. In today's money, somewhere between a quarter and a third of a trillion. And it cost 400,000 people, most of whom never once saw the rocket they were building. Somebody spent 4 years of their life on the pattern of holes in one metal plate. And the thing worth taking from it is not the size. It is the method. They could not see the failure, so they stopped trying to see it. They could not prevent it, so they built something that could take the hit and recover, and then they proved it the only honest way there is, by hitting it themselves, on purpose, every single time. Bigger rockets fly now. 60 years on, no single rocket chamber has ever burned harder than the one they could not get to run. Next time we go back 100 years and 100 feet down. Men dug the foundations of the Brooklyn Bridge inside airtight boxes on the riverbed, and what came up with them, nobody could explain.